Hey Liz, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I am good. So super excited. I know we're still doing our general grief topic. I think this is a really good one, and I'm very interested to kind of hear your perspective on it with kind of your background and your knowledge in grief and healing and all of that. And this was actually sent to me on Instagram that somebody wanted to talk about.
Okay.
So I don't really have answers here. I just have a topic for you.
I'm
So
ready.
this one is grief comparison,
Hmm.
which I think can just kind of go in a lot of different directions. But really just that general, what happened to you was worse than me, or vice versa. What happened to me was worse than what happened to you.
Hmm.
Um, and I guess kind of, I don't know, like just navigating through that feeling on either
Hmm.
side.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know. What are your thoughts on grief comparison? Where does that go for you?
Oh, I think it's real. So I think that is a normal human response that when we hear someone's story, we want to put it somewhere in our brain. Do I have an association with this? Is this worse than something I've known or is it better? So I think that's a normal kind of calibration that we do as humans. And then I'm kind of curious, have you felt that when you interact with people that it is either projected on you, a sense of what happened to you was better or worse than others?
Um, I don't know. I don't think I can't say anyone's directly verbalized that to me.
Yeah.
Um, People have verbalized to me that what they think has happened to me is just like unfathomable. Like they do think it's I would man, how do I even say it? Like on a scale of 1 to 10, that's a 10 in grief. I think there are things that are a little less common, which would make people respond to it differently, right? Like murder and suicide, they're probably very common, but not, you probably don't. I mean, in my mind, I would say you're more likely to know somebody who's dealt with suicide than murder,
Right.
probably. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's not a statistic I know of, but
Sure.
and then to have dealt with both of them, I
Right.
feel like people are usually taken back by that, but
Hmm.
nobody has ever worded it to me in a way of, well, that's like they've never downplayed their own grief verbally to me and been
Sure.
like, well, I went through this, but what you went through is worse. So like my grief isn't worth talking about.
So I think that's a very good point, is that this experience is probably internal for most people. And so
Mhm.
I can speak to my experience as a provider. So sitting with my patients where we may be processing grief,
Mhm.
or they may not even give something credit in their life that this has been substantial and you deserve to pause and feel this, and or you deserve to pause and take credit for this. And what I mean by take credit is when people offer condolences and or support, I find that to be one of the hardest things for people who are grieving to do. um, and again, that's going to vary based on the scenario and the personality, but I've heard a lot of different individuals who have lost um, someone traumatically, that it felt bombarding, that people are wanting to do so much or bring things that couldn't bring that person back. You cannot make this better. And so I think that was an initial, what I'm feeling is worse than anything you could possibly imagine. Like if you felt what I was feeling, if you knew how painful this grief was, you wouldn't be bringing me fried chicken and cake. But I think that's a normal response that people have culturally, where we just want to show up, right?
Yeah.
And we just want to do something, and there's so much we can't control in grief.
Yeah.
And so I think I hear that a lot, as far as, I'm HIPAA, everything people say to me is protected, right? So it's not going anywhere. So I get to hear some of that internal dialogue for people, where it's somewhat bombarding. And I definitely think more often than not, I hear people downplay their experience, because I think there's a lot of, it's scary to think through, kind of like when you say, I've lost someone to murder and I've lost someone to suicide.
Mhm.
That's not small. It doesn't mean that every time you think about it, you have to, be in your feels and like have this big emotional experience. But I think that it is important for people to find a way to carve out time and space to give meaning and value to the loss in their life and what it means to them.
Yeah.
Because for some people, they're very resilient. They have a lot of coping skills and they may have a substantial loss and cope well and stay connected to themselves and stay connected to others and continue moving through their life. It doesn't mean they're not grieving. It just means their grief is going to look different than maybe someone who doesn't have a high level of resiliency, doesn't have internal coping skills, maybe doesn't have support, right? They may have a different experience. So I think it's variable.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I feel like when I've heard it the most is so I have several friends, unfortunately, that have experienced miscarriages.
I was just going to say miscarriages.
Yeah, I think that's a big comparison one. And I've even heard it from the outside of somebody who's not even experienced in the miscarriage that will almost like justify why the miscarriage. Well, she was only 8 weeks. She was only this. Like, losing them at 20 weeks is worse than 8. Oh, really? Have you experienced both? Because if you haven't, I don't think you can say that.
Right.
Like you don't know. You don't even know what they went through. Okay, so if you don't think an 8-week miscarriage is that bad, well, what did you don't even know what led up to that miscarriage. What if they've been trying for 5 years and they finally got pregnant? It wasn't just like we tried, we got pregnant the next day and then we had a miscarriage. So that's also comparison. I will say, if I think about grief comparison, I've heard that comparison from people who've experienced them.
Yeah.
Also, I think justifying them to themselves why it's not that bad, which I feel like is very much a coping mechanism. Like, okay, well, it could have been worse. I could have been this far longer. I know this person was this far along, and it makes them feel better, which if that's how you heal, that's totally fine.
Right.
But I have heard that comparison from people not even involved in the situation.
Yeah. And I think
you lost
a baby. You lost a potential life, something that you were attached to.
Yeah. Like
you experienced it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think that's something that's very isolating, because for some people that pregnancy may not have been something they had shared with anyone. Maybe they had shared it with their partner. Maybe they had shared it with a best friend, or a parent or something. But I do think that is a very unique, intimate loss. And I think it's more common than people realize, but that doesn't make it less meaningful to anyone who's experienced it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for your point on, we don't know what somebody's story is trying to conceive.
Yeah.
And there are so many families that work really, really, really hard to conceive and carry a baby to term. So yeah, that one is very important to be mindful of. That two things: we're going to have a normal human reaction, maybe a defense mechanism of, oh, it's not that bad, or, oh, that is so, like, I can't imagine. That's normal. And so we shouldn't judge ourselves for those things. But I do think it's important that we step back from this idea of putting something in a category, because the reality is we don't get to define what someone else's grief means to them.
Yes.
And if they haven't figured out what it means to them yet, it's not our job to make meaning of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the hardest part, is sitting with someone in the unknown, and or just saying something kind and reflective. Like, how are you doing with that?
Yeah. Let it be like let them figure out how they feel about it, instead of telling them how they should feel about it. I think
Exactly.
is a huge thing to, I know a lot of people have asked me even before this, when I've asked for like, what would you like input on, or to hear about, talk about, just when I've gone through things, people have asked like, okay, how can I like show up for you, or how can I deal with somebody who's going through XYZ? Like, I feel like because I was so open about suicide, people were more willing to come to me and ask, say like, hey, somebody's dealing with a suicide loss. Like, what do I say to them?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. Like, there was nothing that somebody said to me that stuck out to the point where I was like, say this, it'll make them feel better.
Right.
And also like their suicide could be different than like their experience of that loss might be very different. The situation, how it happened, how it came about, what, like
Right.
that's a whole different world. There is truly nothing you can say to somebody in grief other than
Mhm.
just, hey, how can I support you through it? Like, is there something you need from me? I'm here to listen. Like, if
Yeah.
you want to talk, I'm here to listen, but
Yeah.
try
Or
to
if you don't
provide
want
a
to talk,
solution.
let's go on a walk. Let's go
Yeah.
get coffee.
Yeah. We can talk about something else. We don't have to talk about this,
Yeah.
because they might not want to. They might be so tapped out of talking about it, thinking about it. Like, but again, that's not for you to decide, as their friend. And it depends how well you know somebody. But yeah, I think when people have asked me what to say to somebody, I'm like, I I don't have that answer. Which I get why they're coming to me because they're like, well, you've experienced what have people said to you? And I'm like, my answer is that nobody has ever said anything helpful to me. Like none of it's
I
been
love it.
hurtful either. But like I can't tell you a single thing somebody said to me after it. But I could
But
tell you
also,
every single person that showed up
so
physically.
I was just so it's really about the human connection and the reminder that you're not alone in your grief.
Mhm,
And it's not to say that words don't matter or don't say something, but to know that when someone's in an acute traumatic loss and or acute or trauma, or sorry, acute or chronic grief. So when somebody is going through a substantially emotional experience, the part of their brain that is the most active is their emotional brain. And so it's not going to be their logical brain, it's not going to be their rational brain. So all of the words that we say to someone are coming into that rational brain. We're processing it there. And yes, you can speak to the emotional part of the brain, but all that's going to do is feel good, or it's going to soothe, or it's going to help someone feel connected. And I
mhm.
think that's what you so eloquently capture, where there's no magic words. There's nothing you can say to make anything go away, to make it better. Some people may have preferences on what they hear or they don't hear. And great. If you can articulate that, help people help you. But if you can't, that's normal and that's okay. And for you to say so clearly, but I remember who was there. I remember what it felt like having people just sit with me or show up for my children, or
Mhm.
all of those different areas.
Yeah.
Bring
Like
in.
I think that that's the issue with comparison, right? Like who knows what they're going through. Even if they experience the same loss, essentially this, same kind of category of loss,
Right.
what might be the right thing to say to one person doesn't necessarily mean it's the right thing to say to another person. Same for the wrong thing, saying the wrong thing. But I just truly like, I remember you texting me. I know that I was texting you at the hospital. Could I tell you our conversation? Absolutely not. But I know you were texting me. I know I had to text from you every day. I know I had to text
I
from
was just
Brittany.
gonna say, all I know is I text you every single day.
Yeah, like who knows if I responded, but like I saw them. I know who was thinking of me in that moment. And in that moment, was that what I focused on? No. But if I look back, do I remember those people? Do I remember who showed up at the hospital? Do I remember who drove up for the funeral? Do I remember who reached out to me? Like, absolutely. Do I remember what they said? Absolutely not. It didn't matter.
Well, and I think to your point, that is your memory and your experience.
Yes.
And some people may take screenshots of text and read them later.
Yep.
So it's not to say like, okay, don't say anything or make sure you. And we can only speak from our vantage points. And in this community, there may be other people who have experienced something that felt incredibly supportive or incredibly healing. I know that I've heard from other individuals going through grief that just being told there's no wrong way to grieve,
Mhm.
or you're not alone, like I'm here with you. Those types of things might sound generic, but being said with love and from someone where people know that, like I know that they mean that they're with me.
Yeah.
Those types of responses can matter. Or even just saying, I have no idea what to say, but I'm thinking about you.
Yes. And that's what I was just going to say is I think a lot of times we may focus too much on what the message is instead of the fact that it's just I feel like I want to acknowledge that I'm thinking about you.
Yeah.
You don't
I don't
have
know how many times I text. Sorry, say that again.
sorry, I was just saying like I think a lot of times people are looking to send a solution
Right.
and it's
No.
not resolvable. Like it's just a matter of, hey, I'm thinking about you. I don't really say, I just want you to know I'm thinking of you. Like, that is truly enough to say to me. Like, I think that's a great place to start. If you're like, I don't know what to say to somebody.
Yeah.
Just let them know that you want to say something,
Yeah.
I think that's fine.
Yeah. I was going to say, I don't know how many times I just say, ugh, like, ugh, like, just, ugh. I wish there were words for whatever this is, whether that's with a friend or a family member or in therapy when I'm facilitating therapy. This is not a therapy skill. I'm not recommending it. I'm just saying, but that is something authentic that I've come to at times, because truly it's just kind of this moment of like, ugh, yeah.
Yeah, like it's a grievable thing. It sucks. Here we are,
It sucks.
Yeah. And I just, back to that comparison boat, like I just think the best thing we can do is not decide how traumatic that loss is for somebody. Like, whatever and you started this off with like, it is the human thing to do. Where can I place that in my brain? How can I relate? How can I process it? But for me personally, I just think verbalizing how great or not great you think the loss is just something we should steer away from.
Absolutely. I think it's something, when you bring conscious awareness to something, you can break up with it. Like, I'm not going to scale grief, or I'm not going to scale a crisis experience in my life or others.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, you just, you don't know the emotion, and like, we are emotional beings. You also don't know. I think of something as like, I was thinking of an example of something that feels more like detachable. So like, if someone loses a pet, and maybe this is just me, but I'm going to throw this example out there. Like, if I lose a pet, I'm going to be very sad about it. But like, if somebody else loses a pet, I'm sad for them, but I don't have an attachment to their pet.
Right.
Like, I'm sad for you that you're sad, but I don't feel that sadness with you. I feel like it's more, it's like in a relatable way, but some like a very big like dog lover might actually feel a true personal sadness for somebody else's loss. Does that make any sense? So you can't even compare how you feel about somebody else's situation, because
that's variable too.
Emotional background is going to affect that.
Yes.
So it's just, I mean, there literally is no way to compare. So I just truly think like we can think it in our head, and then we just need to get rid of that one. And if you're going to support somebody, support them no matter how great or not great you think the loss is.
Yes. Because the reality is, if it's someone you care about, connecting with them is the priority, not creating meaning and or giving value to what they're going through. You want to value them, the person that you're in relationship with and that you care about. And I'm curious, for people in this community, if, like I asked you, have they experienced that, or maybe they felt some sense of somebody scaling their category of grief and or reaction, or if they've experienced that internally, that sense of, this must be better or worse than what I'm going through.
Yeah. I'd be interested to see who feels like they're on one side of it more than the other. Like, do you kind of fall in the I compare my grief to others, or do you fall more in the I compare others' grief to mine?
Right.
That would be a very interesting thing, I think, to learn. Or if people have, and I feel like people say crazy things and have heard crazy things. And I feel like there's probably people that have like been told their grief is not that valid because of their loss not being that significant. And I think that's the worst thing we can say or do for somebody who's grieving, is to make them feel like it's insignificant.
It's compounding trauma to say that what you're going through does not matter or is insignificant. That's not our place. We can't say that over other people's lives, and we shouldn't, because if someone is hurting and or going through an emotional experience, they need to be seen and they need to be validated, and then they get to make meaning of it.
Absolutely. Very good point. Well, this I feel like can be unpacked in a million different ways. And I actually think it'd be a good thing to dive into maybe on either side later on.
Yeah. I think this could be a really cool conversation ongoing.
Yeah. And maybe we can open up like a chat, like an open chat, or kind of get some feedback and talk on that. So I appreciate your insight on it. And
Thank you.
hopefully this was helpful to some people that are feeling maybe like their loss was less than. So hopefully they know it. It's not.
Yes.
All right. We will see you guys next time.